The seventh paperwork had a typo in my name. 11 years. 11 years of quarterly forecasts, late-night model revisions, and one particularly miserable December where I ate vending machine crackers for dinner 3 nights in a row because we were closing the books before the auditors arrived, and they couldn't even spell my last name right on the way out. Kerrigan, not Kerrigan. 2 eyes. I'd signed my name on roughly 4,000 documents for that company. You'd think someone would have noticed. I sat in my car in the parking garage of the Marriott in Scottsdale, Arizona, still wearing the lanyard from the All Hands Leadership Summit, and I read the paperwork twice. Then I put it on the passenger seat. Then I looked at the concrete pillar in front of me for what felt like a very long time. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, a 312 area code. Chicago. That was a hell of a thing they just did to you. Are you still in the building? I stared at it. My thumbs hovered. Who is this? 3 dots. Then, Weston Pruitt. I'm the one who asked the question about the Q3 variance during the general session. I think we need to talk. Tonight, if possible. I knew exactly who Weston Pruitt was. Everyone in that ballroom knew who he was. He was the reason we had a ballroom. Let me back up. My name is Nora Kerrigan. I spent 11 years as Director of Financial Planning and Analysis at a healthcare technology company called Viridian Systems. We made software that hospitals use to manage supply chain logistics. Not glamorous, but the margins were real, the need was real. And for the first 8 or so years, the leadership was real too. Then our founder retired. He didn't fire himself dramatically or get pushed out. He just got tired. He handed the keys to the board. The board ran a search, and 18 months before the Scottsdale Summit, they installed a new CEO named Barrett Cole. Barrett was 44, had never worked in healthcare a day in his life, came from a series of consumer tech companies where he'd apparently been very good at convincing people that things were about to become much more valuable than they currently were. He had the kind of jawline that photographs well and the kind of confidence that reads as competence until you're in a room with him long enough to realize he's mostly just loud. Within 6 months, Barrett had reorganized the executive team twice, rebranded our product suite with names that sounded like spa treatments, Viridian Clarity, Viridian Align, Viridian Flow, and announced that we were pivoting toward what he called predictive procurement intelligence. I asked, in a one-on-one meeting, what specifically that meant in terms of product roadmap and capital allocation. He told me I was too anchored in legacy thinking. I went back to my office and updated my resume for the first time in 6 years, just in case. The summit in Scottsdale was supposed to be a celebration. Barrett had been hinting for 2 quarters that something big was coming. Something that would, and I'm quoting directly from his all-company email, redefine how Viridian positions itself in the market and unlock a new chapter of growth. He'd been vague in the way that people are vague when they're either planning something genuinely impressive or when they have nothing concrete and are buying time. I'd run the numbers. I knew which one it was. The ballroom held about 300 people. Every director and above from across the country had flown in. Weston Pruitt, Pruitt Capital lead investor, owned roughly 22% of the company, was seated at a table near the front, with 2 people I recognized as members of his investment team. The energy in the room was that particular brand of corporate optimism that functions as a collective act of will. Everyone performing enthusiasm because the alternative is too uncomfortable to sit with in a nice hotel. Barrett took the stage to applause. He was good at this part. I'll give him that. He paced, he paused, he deployed the kind of practiced sincerity that must be taught somewhere, some executive coaching retreat where they work on your eye contact and your hand gestures. He talked about our mission, he talked about the market opportunity, he talked about transformation, and then he announced Viridian Apex, the next generation of predictive procurement intelligence, he said. A machine learning platform that would integrate with hospital ERP systems in real time, flag supply chain disruptions before they happened, and reduce procurement waste by up to 34%. He had slides, he had projected revenue figures, he had a product demo reel that showed a sleek, clean interface doing exactly what he described. He had a standing ovation. What he did not have, and what I knew he did not have, because I had seen the actual product development budget, had sat in the meeting where our head of engineering said they were 12 to 18 months from a working beta, had personally flagged in 2 separate memos that the timeline Barrett was floating publicly was not supported by anything on the engineering side, was a product. Viridian Apex did not exist. Not in the form he just described, not in any form that could be sold or demonstrated to a real client. The demo reel was mocked up by a design contractor. The 34% waste reduction figure came from a consultant's projection model that our own data team had reviewed and internally described as aspirational at best. I sat at my table in that boardroom and I watched my CEO announce to 300 employees and the company's lead investor that we had something we did not have. And then he said my name. The kind of growth I'm describing requires the right team. It requires people who are aligned with where we're going, not where we've been. And in that spirit, I want to announce some organizational changes that reflect our commitment to the future. He said my name the way people say your name when they're not actually talking about you. He said it the way they read it off a list. He thanked me for my contributions. He said the company was moving in a new direction that required a different kind of financial leadership. He introduced my replacement, a man named Todd who had been Barrett's CFO at his previous company and who I had never once been introduced to before this moment. 300 people watched me absorb this. I did not stand up. I did not make a scene. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, set it back down, and kept my face arranged in an expression that I had spent 11 years perfecting, the expression that means I am processing this information and reveals absolutely nothing else. The applause for Todd was polite and slightly confused. I excused myself from the table during the networking break, walked to the elevator, went up to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and breathed for about 4 minutes. Then I went back downstairs to get my coat. And that's when my phone buzzed. I met him in the hotel bar. He was already there, nursing something amber, jacket off, looking less like a man who had just watched a product fabrication and more like a man who had been waiting to confirm a suspicion. He stood when I walked in. "Miss Kerrigan," he said. "Thank you for meeting me." "Mr. Pruitt," I said. "I almost didn't." "I know." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, please." I sat. The bartender came. I ordered a club soda because I needed my head completely clear and also because I had the distinct sense that whatever was about to happen was going to require me to remember every word. He said, "Apex doesn't exist, does it?" It wasn't a question. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about severance agreements. I thought about NDAs. I thought about 11 years and a typo. "What makes you ask?" I said. He smiled, just slightly, because I asked Barrett's team for a technical walkthrough 3 weeks ago and was told the documentation was still being compiled, because the demo reel tonight didn't show a single real data environment. I've seen enough product demos to know a Figma mock-up when I see one. And because you were the most senior financial person in that building and he just cut you loose 2 minutes after announcing a product, you clearly knew the numbers on. He reached for his drink. I've been in this business long enough to know what it looks like when someone gets removed before they can say something inconvenient. I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "I'm going to need to know exactly what you're planning to do with whatever I tell you." "I'm planning to protect my investment," he said, "and I suspect that your interests and mine are currently very well aligned." They were. I want to be honest about the next part, because I've told this story a few times now, and I've noticed I have a tendency to make myself sound calmer than I was. The truth is, I was scared. Not in a way that showed. I don't really do scared in a way that shows, but it was there, behind everything, this low hum of "What exactly are you doing, Nora?" I had a severance package. It wasn't generous, but it was something. I had an NDA in that paperwork with my name misspelled. I had a mortgage in Columbus, Ohio, and a daughter starting her junior year at Ohio State in the fall. And I had not, in fact, made any solid plan for what came after 11 years because I had operated on the assumption that I still had time to figure that out. And here I was in a hotel bar in Scottsdale, talking to the lead investor of my former employer about the fact that our CEO had just committed what was, in my professional opinion, a significant misrepresentation to investors and employees. I went back to my room at midnight. I did not sleep. I made a list. Everything I had actually seen, Everything I had been told, every meeting, every memo, every email where the gap between what Barrett was saying publicly and what we actually had was visible. I did not have access to the company systems anymore. My credentials had been revoked sometime during the ballroom applause, which told you something about the planning that had gone into this. But I had my personal notes. 11 years of methodical, obsessive personal notes, because I am the kind of person who does that, who has done that since my second year in finance, when a VP told me something in a meeting and then denied it 6 weeks later and I had nothing to prove it. I had plenty. Back in Columbus, I called my sister first. She's an attorney, not corporate. She does family law, but she knows enough to tell me when I need to find someone who knows more. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is unusual for her. And when I finished, she said, "Nora, you need to talk to a securities attorney before you do anything else." I already had a name. One of Weston's people had sent it over that morning. I met with the attorney. Her name was Catherine. She was in her early 50s. She had the energy of someone who had heard a great many alarming things and was not alarmed by any of them. And I walked her through everything. The timeline. The memos. The Q3 variants I'd flagged internally that showed the Apex development costs were nowhere near what a functional product would require. The budget meeting where our head of engineering had explicitly said, "We are not shipping anything client-ready in the next 2 quarters." And Barrett had said, "Let me worry about the external narrative." Let me worry about the external narrative. Catherine took notes. She was very still when she took notes. At the end, she asked me 3 questions. And then she said, "We're going to contact the SEC. The SEC has a whistleblower program." I didn't know the details before this. I knew it existed the way you know lots of things exist, abstractly, theoretically, the way you know there's a process for reporting food safety violations at restaurants without knowing the specific phone number. Catherine walked me through it. Under the Dodd-Frank Act, individuals who report securities violations and provide original information can be eligible for financial awards if the information leads to sanctions over $1 million. There are also specific anti-retaliation protections. The timing of my termination, announced publicly during the same presentation in which the alleged misrepresentation was made, before I had any opportunity to raise concerns internally through official channels, was something Catherine described as notable. I filed the initial tip in the 3rd week of January. Here's what happened at Viridian in the weeks after Scottsdale as I understood it later. Weston Pruitt requested an emergency board meeting. He came with questions about Apex, specific, technical, financial questions that Barrett's team could not answer adequately. Barrett told the board that the product was further along than some internal stakeholders appreciated, and that the demo reel was a vision representation, not a current state demonstration. The board asked to see the engineering documentation. There were 17 days of back and forth. I know this because Weston's team kept me loosely informed and because some of what happened ended up being reported later. Barrett presented a set of documents. The documents described a product development timeline that our head of engineering, who by that point had retained her own counsel, later described as having been materially altered from the version she'd signed off on. The SEC began a formal investigation in March. Barrett hired lawyers. 3 members of the leadership team who had been in the room for various Apex planning meetings received investigative subpoenas. I cooperated fully with the investigation. I gave them my notes, my emails from my personal records, my recollection of every meeting I could reconstruct. Catherine was with me for every conversation. There's a version of this story where I tell you I felt righteous and powerful the whole time. That I was a woman on a mission, clear-eyed, unafraid. That version would be cleaner, and it would make a better 2-minute recap. The real version involved a lot of waiting, a lot of mornings where I woke up at 4 a.m. and lay in the dark, adding up numbers I'd already added up. A lot of applying for positions and not hearing back and wondering if something was circulating about me, some version of events in which I was the difficult one, the disgruntled one, the one who couldn't handle change. I took a consulting engagement in February. Small regional hospital system in Indiana needed help building out their FP&A function from scratch. It paid less than I was used to, and I drove 90 minutes each way twice a week, and I was honestly grateful for it. I told my daughter some of what was happening. Not all. She's sharp, she would have gotten the rest of it, but I told her the version that had an ending I could see from where I was standing. I said, I found out my boss was lying and I reported it, and now I'm waiting. She said, good, you did the right thing. I said, I know. She said, you don't sound sure. I said, I'm sure. I'm just tired. The board terminated Barrett Cole in April. The press release cited leadership concerns and a commitment to transparency and accountability, which is the corporate equivalent of saying almost nothing in complete sentences. Weston Pruitt's team was deeply involved in that process. He had been, by that point, in contact with the board for 3 months, and the version of events they presented to the board, supported by the engineering team's own account and by the investigation, was not something Barrett's version of events could survive. I heard about it from Catherine, who called me on a Tuesday morning. He's out, she said. I was sitting at my kitchen table with coffee. I'd been reviewing a cash flow model for the Indiana hospital. I set down my pen. Okay, I said. Nora, she said. I heard you, I see. I said, I heard you, I said. I went back to the cash flow model. Then I stopped. I sat there for a while. I thought about the parking garage in Scottsdale. I thought about the severance paperwork with the wrong name. I thought about the crackers from the vending machine in December 11 years ago, when I was 29 and new and certain that if I just did the work well enough, everything else would sort itself out. I thought about how long I had trusted that to be true. Then I poured out the cold coffee and made fresh. The SEC investigation concluded the following year. Barrett and 2 members of his executive team were found to have violated securities law through material misrepresentation to investors. The sanctions included civil penalties. Barrett was also barred from serving as an officer or director of a public company for 7 years. Under the SEC whistleblower program, I received a financial award. I'm not going to tell you the exact amount. I'll tell you it was enough to pay off the mortgage. I'll tell you my daughter didn't need to take out loans for her senior year. I'll tell you that I sat in the parking lot of my bank afterward and called my sister and she cried, which she would hate me for reporting, but it's true. Catherine's fee came out of it too. It was worth every dollar. The board approached me in May, about a month after Barrett's termination. They needed an interim financial lead while they figured out the next steps. Someone who knew the company. Someone the investment community would find credible, given the circumstances. I told them I would think about it. I thought about it for 4 days. I talked to my sister. I talked to my daughter. I went for a long run on the trail by my house on a cold April morning, and I thought about what I actually wanted, which is a question I had not asked myself with any seriousness in a very long time. I went back to them with conditions. I wanted a clear mandate and defined scope. I wanted direct board access. I wanted the title to reflect the actual role. Interim CFO, not some softer language that let people treat me as a placeholder. And I wanted it in writing that any decision-making around financial disclosures would go through me and would not be subject to override by anyone without board-level approval. They agreed to all of it. I walked back into that building on a Monday morning in May. My badge still had the old title on it. Someone from HR caught me in the lobby and said they'd get me a new one. I said, "Take your time." I had what I needed to do the work. The badge was cosmetic. I spent the next 8 months stabilizing the company's financials, restoring credibility with the investment community, and helping the board run the search for a permanent CFO. I was not a candidate for the permanent role. I didn't want it, and I told them so clearly, which was a sentence I could not have imagined saying 2 years earlier and actually meaning. I knew what I wanted now. I wanted to consult. I wanted to build things from scratch for people who actually needed them built. I did not want to manage up to another Barrett Cole for the rest of my working life. The permanent CFO they hired was good. She came from a mid-sized medical device company in Minneapolis, had a quiet, thorough way about her, asked exactly the right questions in her interview. I liked her immediately. I spent 6 weeks doing a proper handoff, and I gave her the thing I wished someone had given me when I started, a complete, documented, honest picture of where the numbers actually were. Not the version for the ballroom, the real one. I want to say something to whoever is watching this, because I know some of you are sitting with something right now. Maybe it's not a CEO and a fake product launch. Maybe it's something smaller. A number someone told you to change, a report someone asked you to soften, a meeting you weren't supposed to remember. Maybe you're the only one in the room who knows what you know, and you're doing the math on what it costs to say it out loud. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It wasn't easy. There were months where I genuinely did not know how it was going to end, and the not knowing was its own kind of exhausting, a weight you carry everywhere and set down nowhere. But here is what I know. The thing about evidence is that it doesn't care about your title, or your tenure, or how loudly someone tells you that you've misunderstood the situation. It just exists. It waits. And if you've spent years doing the work with enough care to actually know what you're looking at, you will recognize it when it matters. Barrett thought he was managing a narrative. He forgot he was managing numbers. Numbers don't negotiate. I've been thinking a lot about what it actually takes to do the right thing when the right thing costs you something real. Not the version of integrity that exists in a vacuum, where you make the brave choice and nothing bad happens to you and everyone applauds. I mean the version where you're sitting in a parking garage in Scottsdale at 9 o'clock at night with a severance agreement in your lap and your name spelled wrong, and you have to decide what kind of person you are going to be now that no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. That's the version nobody talks about, because it's not clean. Barrett didn't lose because the universe punished him. He lost because he made a specific series of choices to misrepresent something real, to remove the person most likely to say so out loud, to believe that controlling the story was the same as controlling the facts, and those choices had consequences that were always going to catch up to him eventually. He just didn't think they would. That's the part that gets me. He genuinely didn't think they would. I've worked with people like Barrett my whole career. They're not stupid. They're often very smart in certain narrow ways. But there's a particular kind of intelligence that never learned to distinguish between what you can say and what is true, and Barrett had that kind. He built a career on the gap between those two things, and for a while it worked. The way it always works, for a while, right up until the moment it doesn't. What I've come to understand is that the gap doesn't close by accident. It closes because someone who knows the difference decides to say so. That's the only mechanism. There's no automatic correction. There's no invisible hand that reaches in and fixes it. There's just a person, usually a tired person, usually someone who has good reasons not to get involved, who decides that the truth is worth more than the comfort of staying quiet. I was that person this time. I wasn't heroic about it. I was scared and methodical, and I kept very good notes for 11 years, mostly out of anxiety, not principle. But I showed up when it mattered, and I told the truth to the people who needed to hear it, and I did not let someone revise my version of events just because they had more institutional power than I did. That's what I want to pass on, if anything. Not some tidy moral. Just this, the work you do carefully, day after day, when nothing dramatic is happening. The notes you keep, the questions you ask, the small insistence on getting it right even when no one is checking. That work doesn't disappear. It accumulates. And there will come a moment, maybe once in your career, maybe more, where all of it suddenly matters enormously. Be ready for that moment. Keep your records. Know what you actually know. And when someone hands you paperwork with your name spelled wrong after 11 years of honest work, take a breath, set it down, and check your phone. Sometimes the right person is already texting.